네. 아이고 혼자 못 찾았어요.
여기
아 여기입니까?
여기인데
여기인데요.
이제는 무당에서 여기 와서 뭐 하는 게 없어요. 아, 여기 뭐 빨간 한 거, 저 파란 거, 노란
네.
거 막 해서 여기 달리는데
아 네. 사람들 개인으로 옵니까?
개노를 자기 소원 드리고 싶은 사람이 여기 와요.
네. 아
소원 드리고 싶은 사람이.
예.
여기로 들어가는데 어린애 저 애기 키울 때 여기 와 당할망이라고 당할망
당할망.
제주도 말로 할망 당할망 그래가 여기로 와네 막 굿도 하고 무당을 해서 막 피로도 주고 했는데 이제는 그런 게 없어.
아
그러니까 여기 달린 게 없어. 달린 게.
언제야 그만뒀어요 그거?
아 그거 이거 그만두고 내가 한 15년은 되고 있지.
15년. 아 오케이.
15년. 여기서 애기가 무사히 안 자라면 여기 와서 막 공들인다고 해서 무당 빌어서 와서 막 뭐래가 는가 삼승 할머니 무당 할머니에게 비는 거라 비는 무당.
아, 네. 어떻게 갈 수? 나는 거기 가면
길을 가르쳐 드릴게.
아 네. 네. I've been documenting shamanic shrine worship on Jeju Island, South Korea, for the last 5 years. Jeju Island is a beautiful, once more remote place than it is today, located about 60 kilometers south of mainland South Korea. My interest was piqued in shamanism and shamanic shrines a few years ago when I started working on a related project with Korean friends. I became addicted to the thrill of discovering new shrines around the island and new myths of ancestor gods that villagers would relate to me. I heard amazing stories in every village that I visited, stories of faith and stories of survival, and these stories seemed to get more and more interesting as time went by. I felt a moral obligation to do this work, as so much about these minority polytheistic religions have been misrepresented. On Jeju Island, as is the case across the Eurasian continent, knowledge of these religions was deliberately suppressed by governments and other forces. So I decided to make a documentary. I wanted to make a record of the culture, but also to give a voice to a people who have faced great hardship and whose religion has been censored from history. It is my belief that as natural as dams are to beavers, as webs to spiders, as nests to birds, shrines are to humans. On Jeju Island, shrines are created and maintained by village residents over hundreds of years. They are the ultimate outsider art, consisting of stone walls, the individual stones of which were stacked and restacked by thousands of hands over scores of generations. The offerings left at shrines are unique to each village, and most splendidly, their myths, the Bonpuri. The myths of how the gods came to be the guardians of each village are also distinct. All effective healing shrines in the world have the component of myth attached to them. I want to introduce some of the shrines that I explored over the years. I returned to these places many times to shoot parts of my documentary, Spirits, the story of Jeju Island Shamanic shrines. But I didn't just make a film about the shrines. I did years of research. I collected recordings of myths recited by shamans and interviewed hundreds of people to make a real record of individual stories. Over the last couple years, I made a point to photograph the people that I met along the way. I want to show you some of the shrines now. We don't have a lot of time, but I will show you a couple that really stuck out. The first shrine is in a village called Woljang. The great shaman, or Kun Shimbang in Jeju's native language, is the 7th generation in her line to be responsible for the shrine. You can see her there in the foreground of the photo. Now, what is a shaman? That is a big topic for another day, but for the purpose of this talk, know that on Jeju Island, a shaman called Shimbang is essentially a village priest. Shimbangs share a lot of the same responsibilities that community religious leaders all over the world do. For instance, a country pastor in the Protestant sects in America, or Catholic priests for that matter. There are, of course, many differences in the details. The stories of how village shamans came to have their positions in their villages are interesting and often involve an amount of suffering. This fits in with the pattern of the wounded healer found in shamanism and other faiths all over the world. Myth is extremely important to shrine culture. Shincheon Village's shrine myth is one of my favorites. The heroine of the myth is Miss Hyun, an actual historical person who lived some 300 years ago. Every morning, this young girl would circulate the roads of the village, shouting out the wind conditions, so that the women abalone divers would know what kind of work they could perform safely that day. We can't talk about Jeju Island without talking about the women divers, the now world-famous Haenyeo, or sea women. This diving work is treacherous work, entailing free diving to great depths and sometimes holding one's breath for up to 2 minutes. In the end of Shincheon Village's myth, Miss Hyun's brother dies at sea. A gift he bought for her on the mainland, a set of ritual clothes, along with his body, washes ashore with the tide. The women divers of Shincheon Village still hang those sort of clothes, a gift to the goddess Miss Hyun, in the shrine tree today. Now, the shamans have quite a daunting responsibility to assist the residents of their villages in dealing with the stresses and hardships of daily life, and more importantly, in this era, the deep trauma that has plagued Jeju Island. Starting in 1948, there were a series of massacres carried out at the behest of the national government, where some 30,000 people, accused of being communist, were killed in cold blood. I won't show you photographs of the mass graves, or of the people who cry every year at the memorial ceremonies. But they are out there, and you can easily find them online. Amongst Jeju Island's elderly community are many survivors of this horrific period, which is referred to commonly as the April 3rd incident, April 3rd uprising, or simply the April 3rd massacre. I want to show you a video clip about how a woman's relationship with the grandmother goddess of her village's shrine helped her to survive after her entire extended family was killed. This woman was trapped in her home with daily visitations from hostile soldiers, coping with a sick son and expecting a new child. In the most desperate of situations, she turned to the village grandmother goddess for help.
난 요게 좀 시원하냐 난.
예.
천천히 잘 오는 말로 하기 너무 따라들어.
아, 할머니 그 당 가보신 적 있으시죠?
어디
당.
땅?
어디 땅?
할망당.
할망당?
할망.
예, 눈미당.
와산이면 와산이요 회사.
네, 네.
와산.
와산요.
오늘이 며칠이랴?
What is today?
더워. 미치겠는 거나 뭐. 뭐 잊어버린. 거쟁이도 어디로 불리를 못 찾아.
제주도가 고향이지?
여기가 고향.
응.
저기 친정은 저
어디?
수기동에는 와을리 수기동에는
아,
금원 불탑은 서삼 사건에 불탑은데 이게 사람경이도 몇 가오실 거라 더 가위 사신디 친정 식구들도 다 죽어불고 거기에 정은한 나도 이 여기 살아도 여기 살려면 살는 분은 서삼사건 당의 분은 남편도 일러불고
그때 맛이
그때
남편도
예
로스요.
어디간 죽은 줄도 몰라 죽은 터도 못 쳤고 저 행무소에 가긴 가신디 아이고 경인 사는 게 무슨 말을 뭐냐고 그런 거야. 사람이 옆집이 죽어도 모르고 뒷집이 죽어도 모르고.
그 돌에 할머니 있는 거잖아요.
그 돌을 그 집안에 있어.
그죠? 그래서 할머니 그 안에 있잖아요. 그
걔는
할머니
그 할머니는 연급이 하도 조난에 멀탄 양반이 그 길로 요영 길이영 그 요만 썩은 그 길이나 그냥이 글로 저 어디 서울 성안도 그때 말이 시행 아니 그래 성안 정이 그 정이 성안 대정 가는 사람이 글로 넘어갈 때 도비찜을 정 넘어갈 때 미식을 물색이나 뭐 썰이나 그 물건 장심인 뭐 물건을 뭐 그런 걸 뭐 표적을 하나 경허영 하면 그 사람이 고향 넘어가고 이제 그 사람이 그날강 장시도 잘 되고 나도 그런 얘가 있어. 아기를 시방 큰아들 3살에 아버지 잃는 아기 이걸 아기가 경 못 살 때에 아니 그 물건살에 해변 간호란 분은 아기가 막 포를 아판 그냥 힘서 3살 그 정은 4살이 되죠. 4살 나는 애 봄이라서 이제 포를 무슨 막 하는 거라. 아기가 펄 아파. 아니 이제는 어디강 죄는 사람의 죄영 영어영 죄여가민 요디만 심은 죄여가민 그냥 아가 막 그냥 막 감장을 도난 그냥 죽지 살지 새카만 죄여도 아니 되고 약을 해도 아니 되고 유영요래 나온 안에 동네 사람 하는 말이야. 아이 초상도 씻고 아기 병원에 강 아이벼왕 경 힘찐 소리 그때는 이제 아기 러번 주천을 가늘에 넣은 주천 우리 셋다바지가 있어. 그 병원에 가면 일로 끼친다는 거라. 응? 팔을 일로 자른다고. 죄변 약하래. 그땐 그 약도 약방이 어디 심은 그런 게 없었거든. 어선안에 있던 그 소주한 사람 어디서 미신 거영 약 허여민 조민 이젠 다른 사람도 그 사람한테 이 사람도 그 사람한테 경험인 그 사람이 크게 소문나듯이 경은은 어느 그 경은 사람한테 가난에 아명이 약을 써보려니 우란 그 약을 써도 낫진 아니고 펄이 진짜로 이 옷을 벗기도 못하고 그냥 이디가 그냥 이만한 시커먼 이젠 허단 버치난 아닌 게 아니고 참 돈도 없고 돈도 없고 미시가 상 먹일 돈도 없고 입질 것도 없어 내 아기가 그치로 괴노난 그 할머님한테 가는 것도 뭐 별다르게 행할 게 없어. 아이 그들 가오는 약도 아무것도 아니도 그냥
진짜 맛이
그냥 이제 어느 패적이나 옷이 벌 옷 벗기자면 니랑 기도 아파나신데 이제 어느 벌인지 알도 못해.
Completely better from the halmang.
잘 알아들었대.
네네네.
경은은 다른 사람도 부디 펄뿐이 아니고 못 견디면 부스레미가 못 견디나 뭐 구안하지 못하면 그들 가오는
이게 강하면 좋아. 그냥 그 맛에 본향이 하는 거죠.
I'd like to talk about another village now that suffered during the massacres of 1948. In this case, the entire village was burnt to the ground, and the few survivors were forced to flee. Those who did survive still live in nearby villages, a few kilometers down the mountain. The shrine located in the old destroyed village is called Sose Meat Shrine, and came to fame 2 years ago when its holy trees were deliberately cut. The message the desecration was sending was clear. The perpetrators were saying to the survivors and their families, who still make the trip up the mountain to pray, that they were no longer welcome to practice their religion on the very land that used to be theirs. This wasn't the first time that Sose Meat Shrine had been desecrated, I later learned. I felt a responsibility to talk about the destroyed shrine at Sose Mi. I felt this responsibility as people from areas with traditional shrine worship had really opened up to me and shared their stories. These are stories that people weren't talking about. The destruction of shrines was very much underreported. Some local friends and I decided to start a group whose purpose was to rebuild the shrine. We started by making a safe path to the altar. Our bigger message was that in the face of old prejudices and unbridled development, that Jeju Island sanctuaries should be left intact, as they are holy places for traditional islanders. The townspeople did indeed return to worship at the shrine. Later, they thanked us for our efforts, but said that until the shrine was officially protected by law, that they feared the problem would continue. These two women, now in their late 70s, are survivors from the area. I consider myself lucky to have spoken with people who survived such a tragedy. Sose Meat was not the only shrine to be destroyed during my 5-year project. In fact, I've counted about 8 shrines that have been destroyed in that time. Some examples of these shrines would be the shrine in Yere village, where the woman divers celebrated the famous Yeongnu gods. The several hundred-year-old shrine tree was cut and the shrine wiped out to provide space for a single unit of this huge tourism complex. The village has been embroiled in legal conflict over this development since its inception. In the town of Sungsan, 2 shrines were destroyed despite nearby Sunrise Peak being designated as a UNESCO-protected site. Local businesses profit from the divers. Many local businesses make use of the divers' image for their advertisements, but yet the community failed to protect those same divers' shrines. This woman was brought to tears just talking with me about the recent incident. She had prayed at the shrine all of her life. The shrine that the woman was crying about had been located here, in a hotel parking lot. I visited the parking lot and can safely say that it had 50 to 100 spaces. The shrine that only took up 2 of these spaces could have easily been spared. Jeju Island shrines are deeply tied to the island's past, to the trauma and to the struggles that the people of the island have faced. I believe these shrines should remain now, as they always have been, as natural sanctuaries, places for prayer, and ritual centers. These shrines represent a common polytheistic shamanic heritage that we share across national boundaries. When our traditional heritage lands and sanctuaries are desanctified, I believe there is something in the community and in the human spirit that is lost. These spaces give us identity through myths, community, and personal solace. Above all, in the case of Jeju Island, they give us healing. Well, this shouldn't end on a negative note, and I'm not just saying this only because these talks are supposed to end upbeat. Right now is the right time for humanity to protect its shrines. In fact, this issue is something that is being discussed around the world. For example, the country of Estonia has been making serious efforts over the last few years to protect its some 500 shamanic shrines. In our complex world, we need sacred spaces. I don't want to leave you with the impression that I, as a foreign person on Jeju Island, am the only person worried about the future of the island shrines. There are plenty of local researchers, artists, activists, and interested citizens that are very much trying to make a difference. This is likely the case in a majority of regions where such cultural treasures are being threatened, from Estonia to India to South America to here in South Korea. I will say this. Keep these shrines as they are. Maintain them as holy places. The gods know we need more of that in the world today. Lastly, I want to leave you with some images of healing shrines from around the world. Thank you very much.